In this video, I'm going to talk about the management of the coronavirus by India and the United States, particularly from the point of view of what the scientists of the two countries have to say about this and how it impacted the management of the coronavirus by the governments of the two countries. You would be so surprised to know that ICMR, the Indian Council of Medical Research, has a very different point of view from the scientists of the United States. I read somewhere from the ICMR, the scientists in India do not want to test, and they have a good reason for that. And it is science being influenced by culture, by pragmatism, and also some unconscious influence of the philosophical tradition of India. You wouldn't know that even the scientists would ever have that attitude. They said you should not test. Why? Because people will panic and will create a lot of fear, and that will be counterproductive. And what they correctly assumed was that if they test, probably there will be 1 million people, 10 million people, or even 100 million people who have the coronavirus. And once they come to know that they have this virus, it will do a lot of damage to the psychology of the people, and also damage the economy, which is already struggling. So they made a very wise decision not to test. And it is the best decision that can be made for a country like India, where they can't afford to test so many people. Just now, I just saw the White House briefing that they have finished 1 million people, testing 1 million people. Okay, and that is perhaps needed here and perhaps not needed here also. And let me go and then take a look at the views of the scientists here. And then they have said, no, this is going to be really a big disaster. And at least 100 million people, 100,000 people will die in the United States. Or sometimes 200,000 people will die. People say they go by science. The scientists predict this is what is going to happen, and then there is math involved in computer modeling, and then let's say this is the modeling that gives you this kind of scenario. So we have to prepare, and then tremendous amount of governmental resources has been spent on managing this. And what has happened to the people who are subjected to this process, and people who are listening to the media? And the media is projecting every few minutes what is happening to the people who have been affected and how many people are dying, the death statistics. And then this creates a lot of fear in these people. Not only fear, but then they also begin to assume at the subconscious level that we are going to be affected by this virus, because they say this is the number that is being predicted by the scientists and by the computers. It is so strange that President Trump, he was a very strong man and very positive man, and he never believed in these statistics at all. He never believed in this logic at all. He lives in a different domain. If he had believed in the logic, he would not have become the president at all. You know, and logic has its own limitation. So we need, what the lesson that we have to learn from this is how culture influences even science and the attitudes of the people. In India, people are very cool, and how it is going to be resolved, we do not know. If you have a logical mind, you will completely freak out because there are 1.3 billion people living in India and the resources are very meager. It is impossible to test even 1/10 of the people. And what are you going to get out of it is another thing. So what they use is they may use, and Prime Minister Modi said that they use some of the Ayurvedic preparations, and that will help. So the lesson that we are learning from here is we should not put out negativity at all, and that doesn't mean you should not test or anything. You can go and test because we have been psychologized in the West in a certain way to go credence to only science and computers. But then, if you take a look at what damage does it do to the psychology, it has already done a lot of harm to the psychology. To think about uh, negativity, to think about death, and why can't we focus attention on the other side? When in the beginning, when Trump was talking about the virus, it's just a flu, it will just only disappear. That was his consciousness. And then he himself was influenced by this science and math and computer modeling. Oh, this is what is going to happen. And now people who are cautious, even I watch TV, even very credible people, scientists, they say 100,000 it seems to be a huge number. It may not happen. So to look at the Indian model is that you create the reality. Yad bhavam tad bhavati. Whatever you think becomes the reality. If you collectively project negativity, saying that no, this is what is going to happen. This is what we expect. We expect that by the end of June, everything will be okay. And why do you expect that? Because that expectation comes out of some computer modeling that tells you this is what is going to happen. But whereas in India, they don't, they are constrained by so many things. At least, it results in protecting the economy because people are not panicking. Their psychology also is protected. So there is always a lesson to learn. And the lesson to learn is what Einstein used to say about science and religion. India is a spiritual country, and it is the cradle of civilization and also spirituality. And they don't panic based on science. They have tremendous amount of faith, and it is the faith that has kept the country to go on and produce people like the Buddha. to the world. So it is important not to get excited one way or the other. And this excitement is going to harm people. It is always good to remain calm and totally positive. Now, I said I was going to tell you about what Einstein said. Einstein said, where when uh, science where science ends, their religion begins. So religion is not just superstition. It is a higher reality. It is a higher logic, and that logic belongs to Atmayanam. Atmayanam is the soul's intelligence. Vidarka Atmayanam is the sutra. It says it is a logic which is a superior logic, not a logic which is a limited linear logic based on uh, cause and effect and binary oppositions and an algorithm built on that. And now modern science says that everything is uncertain. Heisenberg's theory of uncertainty. So nothing is certain. Then who is making everything like solid and concrete is our own thought process. Our mind really creates matter. This is science also. This is what Max Planck. Max Planck said that matter originates from consciousness. So we are creating the all action. I wish many people had supported President Trump's approach to the outcome of this of anything of this, particularly of this virus, where it is going to end. If there is a difference between a president or a king or a ruler or a prime minister and an ordinary citizen in terms of consciousness. The reason why he was able to become the president was because he was able to conceive of it. So I came up with a theory that I gave to Wayne Dyer, and he wrote a book on it, and then it became a bestseller. And to Wayne Dyer, I told him, you cannot conceive that, you cannot create that which you cannot conceive of. So you should be able to conceive of that, and then if you're able to conceive of that, then you will create it. So everything, matter, is subjected to your own concept, your own conceptions, your own thinking. Yad bhavam tad bhavati. Everything is your thinking, your thought process. So when you open the TV, what happens here? There death. How many deaths have happened today, and what are the other places where deaths have occurred, and how many people have contracted the disease? Nothing is being done in India like that, and we are going to see that India is going to come out, relatively unhurt because of this, because there are very few cases. Because I call India a few times a day and then ask them what's going on, and then they said there are no cases have been reported. Why? And if you just, honestly, I tell you, if you just go and test them all, which is impossible, even to test 10% of the people is impossible. And if you do test them, we're going to see that tremendous amount of people have been affected by this coronavirus. There will be many reasons why it has not shown up outwardly. Number one is they have a very strong immune system, or because they have been exposed to a lot of bacteria and viruses, and then corona could not have an impact on it. That's one of the plausible arguments. And the other thing is, the weather. The weather is a hot weather, and the virus won't be able to survive in that hot weather. There are other things, they can think about. But the lesson, particularly for the United States, is that the media shouldn't be focusing on the uh, the negative aspect of it. Let's not worry about it. Whatever is going to happen, they are going to happen, and they are not happening in in an astronomical uh, numbers, and where people who have been dead, who are dead, are people who are vulnerable, people who are above the age of 60, and then or people with other medical conditions, and then they are the people who died, and they are going to die anyway, and then we do not know whether we could completely attribute their death to coronavirus. Probably coronavirus was the immediate cause, maybe otherwise they would have lived for another few years or so. So the most important lesson is to know that you create the reality. Even at a particle level, the particle behaves according to your own hypothesis. If you change your hypothesis, the particle behaves differently. So the hypothesis and the behavior of the particles are linked together. The observer is responsible for the observed. The observer is responsible for the observed, and that is not philosophy, that is quantum physics. So this is the thing that is not only relevant for understanding the management of this coronavirus, but also it has implications for our own personal life. You have to really understand that you create the reality by your own consciousness. That's why the negative thoughts process is responsible for creating poverty as prosperity. And we have to really be careful about what you want to create and what you don't want to create. And so this is the lesson that everybody has to learn from looking at the management of coronavirus by these two countries. One tied to this logic and math and sciences, and the other is not worried about that. It is worried about uh, the negative results, and then they don't want to make that into a reality. This is India's contribution. And I just want to mention about two people who were tremendously influenced by India. One is Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs went to India because he was influenced by the Harvard researchers who went to India to meet this guy named Karoli Baba. And Daniel Goldman, and I forget the names of the other people who went to spend time with Neem Karoli Baba, and they gave a lot of LSD to the Baba, and Baba took a lot to kill him 10 times, but he did not even go to sleep. And they were amazed by the amount of power that he has to control the physical body. And And Steve Jobs was fascinated by that. So he went to see him. By the time he went there, Baba had passed away. He had attained Samadhi. So he stayed in India, and he went to the Himalayas. And he writes in his book, the White Book, which is his biography, it's quoted that he learned that he attributed his success to what he learned from India, which is not about logic, it's not about science, it's not about reasoning. It is about something that transcends logic, which is an eternal truth. And that he says he learned from India, and that was the secret for his success. He only visited India once, and after that he went into Zen Buddhism, but then the beginning lesson came from India. And I also want to mention one more thing, that Mark Zuckerberg went to Steve Jobs when the company was not doing well in the beginning, and Steve Jobs told him to go to India, to this particular temple where Neem Karoli Baba lived. And then Mark Zuckerberg has made it uh, public when Modi, Prime Minister Modi, came to this Silicon Valley. He said, I'm very indebted to your country because my mentor, Steve Jobs, asked me to go to India. See, I'm not promoting, Indian tourism or anything. I'm promoting something that is, I would want to call it quantum physics, as it can be, applied to human life. Everything is uncertain, non-local. There is non-locality. You cannot fix anything. So if you are poor today, it doesn't mean anything. That's why it is very important to listen to Trump saying. He says, we are going to build this economy even better than what we had before. And that is important. You should not come and say the numbers don't work. All this, if you are just tied to numbers, logic as something that has to do with logic, you cannot really be outrageous. Pythagoras' number theory is different from our number theory. And the numbers have a mystical quality which transcends our reasoning capacity. Numbers can predict things. I just want to close my presentation just by referring to one thing. Maybe I'll say, yeah, one reference to Sylvia Browne. Sylvia Browne was a great psychic who lived in the United States, who was used by the police to also to investigate some murder cases and so forth. And she predicted as early as 2008 there will be, in 2020, there will be a virus, and that will cause a lot of respiratory problems, creating pneumonia. This is very precise, and Larry King had her on his show multiple times. and even said in one of his talks with Sylvia Browne, you have so much power and ability to predict. If I had the same ability, I would make ton of money. And she said, you know, she is not allowed to do that. And how did Sylvia know about this? You know, she's dead now. So there is a way of knowing things beyond logic. And there are many people like Sylvia Browne, or there are so many people like Sylvia Browne living in India who could predict exactly what it is. That is why in India, the Supreme Court and the University Grants Commission, they all approved astrology as a science. Do you think that this will happen in the United States? No. When the Supreme Court gave a verdict that astrology is a science, Vedic astrology, not the Western astrology, there were a lot of I think a couple of Nobel laureates objected to that, and then went to the Supreme Court judge. It is not a science by any standard, and then they said that your approach to science is very limited, and then they dismissed these people's petitions. Again, the thing that we have to learn is logic is not everything. So don't expect, and it's something that is limited, negative, and it is going to happen. So stay away from the negativity. I also at this point want to recommend a program by Benny Hinn and another pastor from Africa, Chris. They were able to get nearly 3 billion people to listen to that. On March 27th was that program aired. And it was about prayer, how prayer can change realities. And it was mostly about the coronavirus. I recommend that too. So it's important that we have to look at science, but then with caution. And finally, what Einstein said about religion and science will remain as a maxim to create a new paradigm. Einstein said that science is lame and religion is blind, so they cannot show you the full picture. If you want to get the full picture, you have to bring science and religion together. Science has to expand its methodology, and religion has to get rid of its blind faith. God bless.